Bryan, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you today.
Thanks for having me on. First, Brian.
Well, it's a long time coming. I know we have a lot of overlap with mutual connections. We've connected on LinkedIn a ton. So, yeah, it's good to have this deeper conversation, which I always love with this podcast is really going into your story and kind of where you help people. Because ultimately, I mean, that's the name of the game here.
Right. I think it's a great opportunity to have this I love that you chase things down with curiosity and like to have big deep conversations that, most of us can't really have interaction by interaction on LinkedIn. So, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that actually is that's a nice transition to where I wanted to start, around like this idea that you talk about it with strategic resets. Because I know and that's one of the reasons Just Get Started exists because,
Sure.
like, I kinda wanted a big change with that. So before we get down that rabbit hole, I'm kinda hoping you can share a little bit so folks understand kind of your strategic reset, or I guess maybe what led to the aha moment of, "I need to change." Can you share a little bit of the behind the scenes, I guess, of where
Which
that originated?
which one? There are quite a few. I guess we can get into the hero journey at some point, but we'll dive into at least sort of the start of it right now. And I don't think my story is a lot different from a lot of people on LinkedIn. I had been working, first really big one, I had been working in the Walt Disney Company for a good many years as a producer. And uh, the mantra around Disney, even if it was sort of kept quiet, was don't bother coming in Sunday if you weren't here on Saturday. And I really kind of kept failing upwards at Disney for a while, but the last year or so was so utterly exhausting for me. I think we see a lot of language around people being in the grind and somehow celebrating the grind, and I have a very different point of view on that. I don't buy into the grind thing because it ends up where you just run yourself out. And I was so burned out. I was such a workaholic,
Mhm.
and that had to change. And so I sort of, at that time, made the decision to become a business owner. The problem was that our primary clients were still entertainment industry clients with the same
Mhm.
demands. And so, but that was the first thing. Like I just couldn't do the corporate thing anymore. I had done very well at it, but it had just worn me out. So that was one big reset that really kind of kicked off, the early part of my entrepreneurship journey. And I've owned several businesses at this point. And then, I'm also a recovering alcoholic. So I've taken some trips around the sobriety journey a couple of times. And both of those come with their own kinds of hard resets of, how we do things and the survival tools that we use, or the things that had been used that we had used to keep us in surviving stop working. Right, they become the problem. So yeah, I've really had a couple of them, and uh, it just has meant trying to do things more consciously on the other side of that reset. So as I apply it to my client life, um, I tend to work with people who are high functioning leaders. They own businesses or they work in corporations, and they get to a point. You're what, early 40s, Brian?
Yeah, 42.
Yeah, so that's like the most common age, right? Is that we sort of get to the later part of our 30s and we go, wait a second, what am I doing?
Yeah. How'd I
What
get
is it?
here?
How did I get here? Exactly. And so that strategic reset for me is we're going to take a pause and focus on some things that are going to help for the later part of your career, right? Or the later part of your life. And I kind of see it. I spent 10 years coaching competitive cyclists. And so my coaching actually comes from moving people literally down the road or getting people to perform differently. So I see a strategic reset is as kind of a form of talent or player development that needs to happen when we can't play with the same
Yeah.
tools that we used before.
How did you go back to Disney for a minute? Because
Sure.
if I recall, that was like your dream job, right?
No, my dream job actually was before that.
Oh, okay.
I Yeah, my dream job was before that. I was going to do a PhD in history at one point, and I have a master's in history.
Okay.
And about a year out of graduate school, out of my master's, I got a job working for Steven Spielberg, and we were collecting video Holocaust survivor testimony.
Mm,
And so I had spent 3 years like doing this job that maybe 50 people in the world were doing. And we were collecting Holocaust survivor testimony. And this was really even before kind of the commercial internet, right? It was sort of the early start of it. There were no search engines. There were just directories and some browsers. And we were creating this whole searchable library of science thing around watching these fascinating life stories, these human stories. And ultimately I got hired away from there by Disney because we were on the front end of search and search technology. Got hired away to help acquire a search engine and then incorporate it into the early Disney Internet Group.
okay, gotcha. Are you so when you're I guess and you could talk about that transition, but I guess where I was trying to get to is when you're at Disney for that time and you keep kind of moving up,
Mhm.
do you feel like I get this is something I know I felt and a lot of people do is like almost you sell out your soul a little bit of like, but it's a promotion. It's proving my identity. Like they want me here. You know what I'm saying? Like did you feel that throughout these kind of
Totally.
promotions?
Totally. Like, listen, it's very sexy to wear the mantle of I'm a producer, right? Like, because you hear the name producers of making movies or whatever. But it's very sexy to go, hey, Brian, senior producer, right? I'm making these games for online for kids and these things that people touch. And you have a lot of status in that role. And so, yeah, for by all means, the identity's wrapped up in there. And I never really fit the Disney identity. Like when I got hired, a friend of mine had pulled me away and she said, "Do you want to work for Disney?" And I said, "Absolutely not." Like, didn't those people kill Jim Henson?
Yeah.
And she said, "Come on, do it. Like, do it for a year. It'll be a well-paid graduate fellowship." And then that's what it was, except that that was the first internet bubble. So, boom, 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 in early 2000, 2001, it collapsed. So you kind of sit in there. And yeah, it takes a lot to unwind that identity. I mean, that's one of those things when I talk about a strategic reset is exactly that. It's like, let's remove the role from your identity, right? And stop
Yeah.
making the role your identity and make your identity something else. So yeah,
Mm.
you hit the nail on the head with that.
How did you and I don't know if you stumbled into it or and it's or maybe you had like one of those, kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobis ahead of you kind of guiding you, but like how did you find out in that period wherever it was like, shit, this isn't it. This isn't working. I got to do something different. What was that kind of wake up call?
I I got handed this really sweet project in my last year and a half or 2 years of Disney. But every sweet project comes with some handcuffs, right? There's always
Mm,
a trade off. And we were developing a big subscription software, educational software experience for preschoolers and their families. And it was edutainment, right? But it was so hard to do. And it was a situation where our developers happened to, I was in California in Los Angeles, and our developers were in the Boston area. And so things were just
right.
not going quite as quickly or efficiently as we needed to. So I ended up having to go back and forth to Boston for about 15 months, 2 weeks there, 1 week home, 2 weeks there, 1 week home. And, I think that just the toll of the travel and the pressure at some point just got to me. I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is just not healthy. And if moving up means more of this, I'm not interested. I'm not. That's not who I'm going to be.
Mm. Well, the reason I ask is because that's hard for some people to turn down.
Sure.
It's a status, as you mentioned, right? It's, "Hey, I'm the producer. Maybe it's more money." How did you weigh, I guess, I'm willing to walk away from this, from all this other nice shiny object on this end? And maybe that's helpful for people in a similar position now, kind of
No, I
thinking
don't
through.
think it wasn't really working for my relationship with my wife. It wasn't really working well for my relationship with me. I think fortunately we had developed enough pad where I could make it happen.
Mm,
Um, and I would say I wouldn't, that transition was not as clear cut as it sounds, right? My antidote to this was to go and build a digital media agency, right? And effectively we were creating on more online media and apps, but it was still for entertainment companies. Disney was still our primary audience.
mhm,
I think it was the break from that sort of that agency that was probably the bigger break. To be honest, we sort of were doing that and had the banking crisis in 2008. We were sort of too small to succeed. We weren't big enough to succeed.
yeah,
Uh, we could be really nimble, but it wasn't going to work. And I think, after about another 4 years of still having Disney as a primary client, where I kind of woke up one day and said, this is, I'm not, my partnership relationship isn't great. This isn't working. We're not clicking. We kind of got into this for the wrong reasons. And the older I was getting, at a point I was in my, late 30s at that point, maybe even a little bit older. And I said, I don't really want to make kids and family entertainment. This is just not what I want, right? I don't have kids. And the further away I get from it, like the content becomes less relevant. Like there's going to be other people who are closer to it who can do it better. So
yeah,
that shift, I then in that shift got out of that side of the entertainment world and moved into fitness. Right, I own some fitness studios in Los Angeles. I was building a fitness brand and just wanted something where I could see more uh, direct help and growth and impact on a 1-to-1 or one
mm,
to 50, 50 people experience, right? I could see it more immediately. Like if you're doing something online, you can't actually see who's receiving it. You can't see how they're receiving it. There's no feedback, right? There's not. It's all in metrics. It's all stuff that we make assumptions about.
right, yeah. So now you mentioned the cycling side of things, which I love. I wanna get into some of that. I love how you
Sure.
kind of put that into your coaching, which is kinda I like the nomenclature. Were you already cycling when you went to the fitness side of things, or was that kind of around the same time you started that?
I had been a really avid cyclist as a teen, and gave it up for 20 years of bad habits and came back to it in my late 30s. I think this is what happens to a lot of, at least men in their late 30s. And I don't want to, I don't want to leave women out, but I think definitely for men, we get to our late 30s and we've been living the grinding life and we go, what am I doing? Right? I need some more health in my life. I need some more fitness I need something, you know, my body doesn't feel the same. And you start to figure out like, what is it I'm going to do? And so I came back to cycling in my late 30s and I went like I do like so many things with work and alcohol. I treated it addictively. I was like, I'm racing, I'm moving in, I'm doing all the things, right? I bought into the full community, full culture. And that turned into really the beginning of my coaching career. So I had been cycling before the fitness studio
Mhm,
and opened an indoor cycling studio and sort of small group fitness. And yeah, that's how they all kind of came together.
yeah. No, you make a good point though, and yeah, we only can speak, I guess, on men, right? As 2 men talking about this, but, like, I went through something similar in, I guess you could say 2018, where I started CrossFit, which now it's been, what is that, 8 or 9 years, and I wasn't out of shape. I've always been, like, tall and
Yeah,
lanky, but, I had the opposite effect, which I don't think it's talked about nearly as much. Like, we always talk about body image issues, and it's normally on the bigger, like, hey, I'm overweight or whatever. But I actually had it on the opposite side where I'm like, I'm lanky, I don't have any muscle.
right.
And I had a lot of that, and I still do it from time to time. But you're exactly right. Like it was in, I guess that would be like my early to mid 30s where I was like, I got I want to I wanna be able to do things, and not that I was out of shape, because like I said, I was
Right.
170 pounds soaking wet, but no muscle, but I was like, I wanna be asked, like, when someone's moving, like, I wanna be the one where they're like, "I gotta call Brian because he can lift stuff," like,
Right.
so, like, my mentality changed, and I have a feeling, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like with a lot of even friends of mine, there's, like, the group that's like, "I'm gonna be fit and healthy, and I'm focused on longevity," and, like, and then there's this other group of just like, "I don't care." It's rare I find, like, a meet in the middle person. It's like, they just don't care enough about it, and then you have folks that really focus on it. And I don't know what that is, but anyways, just something more anecdotal I noticed.
Well, I think it's I've been I'm not so much around fitness anymore, although I ride and I own a big cycling event, and so it's still part of my life very much. But um, I think it's most of the people who I've interacted with tend to kind of go all in, and at some point they sort of change and they may move around. I don't think that there's necessarily. I haven't experienced so much of that ambivalence. Most of the people I know are already in it. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to do this thing.
Mhm.
I'm going to take on this fitness role." And but I think it's interesting that 7 years ago you started CrossFit in
Yeah, something like that.
2018.
Yeah, I guess
So
7, 7.5, something like that, yeah.
So at 35, yeah, I think, oh, right. That's that time frame as well where people start trying to find community that they may have lost or
Mhm.
find some community that they can attach to. And I think that that's really what I noticed a lot when I had the fitness studio was that people often just showed up because they needed some kind of sense of connection or community. And if they could do it while getting fit at the same time, then fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and everyone's situation's different. I know for me, there was a big identity shift with, like, my career, and, I was used to be a PJ professional. I was a golf professional was my first
Oh,
career, teaching
really?
golf. Yeah, so but I'd left that fully really in, like, 2012, 2013, and then transitioned into more sales roles. But, like, around but it's funny, to just talk about this now because like, around that time, I got, my marriage wasn't great for a little while, and then we got separated in late 2018. But, like, it was really interesting around that time because I was changing a lot. I was becoming very entrepreneurial. So Just Get Started podcast came into existence the end of 2017, CrossFit 2018, like,
Right.
it all kind of stemmed, I think, was like as the relationship was kind of faltering because I think we were both going in 2 different directions. So, I think, again, everyone has different situations, but, like, as I just look back with that lens, it's like, it was probably for me, to your point, more community, people that I, maybe more, I felt that they were more in line with my thinking and stuff. Maybe that was the reason, you know?
Yeah, I think a lot of us end up feeling unmoored a little bit, right? Untethered. You've been so concentrated on work or working for someone else or whatever, or building or in this mode of go, go, go. And as these other parts of our lives dissolve or identities change. I mean, I think this is a pretty actually a commonly documented kind of psychology, right? In our 20s, we're launching. In
Mhm.
our late 20s to mid 30s, it's build, 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 grasp, wrestle things into existence, right? This identity of doing and being defined by the role. And sometime in the late 30s and early 40s, a lot of people tend to start going, wait a minute, I'm feeling dissatisfied with things, right? You feel
Yeah,
this itch of dissatisfaction. And the shift is more what is that the things that I wanted before or I thought I wanted are not what I want now. I think that's also a big shift. It's like coming to terms with what are the things that you've been telling yourself you wanted? What are the things that we subscribe to in thinking we want, and then actually reconciling what it is we really want, right?
What have you are there characteristics of the people you work with? Because I can only imagine, just again, myself and all the people I know, there's people that take control and they make a commitment to change, and then there's people that don't, and there's gotta be characteristics that I don't know what it is. I'm just kinda curious if you've seen a through line.
Do you mean characteristics of the problems or characteristics of the personalities?
I guess I was more thinking on the characteristic of the personalities. Like,
Yeah.
why does someone this is this something is sorry, I'll go in a rabbit hole for a minute because it really
Let's do it.
fascinates
I love rabbit holes.
me.
My goal is to actually push you past an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is something for me personally is because I look at like, okay, how was I this completely different person? Obviously, there was a lot of similarities of how I am, like,
Mhm.
my values and stuff, but a completely different person, call it, 10 plus years ago, and lazy, complacent. Like I blamed a lot of other people. I complained about things so much. And I'm an entirely different human being now, all because I decided to make a commitment to change and understood that it was gonna take a long period of time. And I'm wondering, like, do you find that the same with everyone, or there's certain characteristics you can pull of like, that's why that person is going through this, this transformation because they have these similar things.
Um, I'm just sort of thinking through the commonalities for people that I work with. I think the people who have the most success with me are the ones who come the most curious, and they're the ones who are most willing to be investigative and to look at their part in their story,
Mm,
and they're willing to experience a process. I think that people who tend to be more process oriented uh, do very well in this work because there's a certain inherent patience to it. I think people who come and say, this work has to get me a new job in 12 weeks are never going to, it's not going to work.
yeah.
It's not going to work, right? They're coming at it because they want the outcome. And this is true, by the way, for athletes. So I've coached hundreds of competitive cyclists, and the ones who says, I need to be on the podium of this event in 8 months or my life is over or whatever it is. Like, I need to have this thing. And they hang their entire identity on the outcome. It doesn't really work because they will always cheat the process because they think they're not doing enough or they're not doing the right things, or they will, I think a good job of a coach is to keep people from running with scissors, right? Whether they're in doing the sport thing or if I'm coaching them as executives, right? And by running with scissors, I mean, stop picking up your character flaws and running with them. Stop picking up your fears and running with them just because it's comfortable, right? Uh, and so I think a good coach will actually have a restraining influence and make it okay to do things differently. Because, you know, I think you and I left to our own devices are going to do a lousy job of giving ourselves permission to do certain things or to not do certain things, right? And it often helps to have an accountability influence to say, hold on, no, you can give yourself permission to take a day off. It's really okay. In fact, it's going to serve you really well. You're not going to believe it, but it will.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the tough conversations I have to have internally in the accountability mirror. How much do you think now? I guess we're on this topic. I'm also thinking about pain, and it's like, do you find that the people, and I'm talking through this, I guess, as I'm asking the question because again, I'm thinking more myself, but as I relate to others, I can't get in other people's heads. But like the times where I kind of felt like I'm okay, like yeah, it sucks, but it's not the worst. I find I don't make as much change as when I'm actually, like, in the suck and like, this is I gotta do something.
We move at the speed of pain. And that's absolutely true. I mean, I can tell you, I quit drinking for 3 years before I finally had to quit drinking, right? And every night it was the same. It was the same cycle every single day until things became and things were not psychologically painful enough, and that I could always find a reason to say it wasn't that bad, or I could always find a justification about why my story was different than someone else's, or I could always find the differences that somehow excused me out of the process of making the change until things became painful enough that I couldn't make that excuse anymore. So I do think that there is a huge component of rock bottomness for a lot of people. And as I sort of hate to be that coach, right? I hate because it does feel a little bit like crisis management. I mean, I sort of have two kinds of people, right? I have the kinds of people who've been grinding themselves down so much that now they're overwhelmed and overload and leadership problems and all that are coming home to roost and they need to readjust. And then there are other people who are doing pretty well, but they know that the pace that they're doing it at isn't sustainable. In either case, you got to become a different kind of player for whatever's next, right? You got to become a different kind of talent for and train different talents for whatever comes next. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, I think pain is a huge thing. And I think it's either you're in it or you can feel it really coming up fast.
Uh, Taking that second person, the one that's, just kind of they're doing well and they're kind of full throttle, at it. This question that comes up a lot is like, what is enough? Like when is enough enough? Do you have an answer to that? Just from that.
I think you need to have a talk with my dear friend Allison Tetrick, who is one of the most well-known women cycling pros, retired pros in the country, because we have this
Okay.
conversation about enough all the time. And you can imagine that process of going from being a professional athlete to whatever's next. That identity shift is like,
Yeah.
I don't know. So and
Yeah.
I don't. I think enough is one of those internal questions, right? I think a lot of times is the acquiring of more. What is it filling up for you? Is
Yeah.
it is the thing that you're trying to add? Is it actually filling a giant hole in your soul? Or is the thing that you're trying to add an actual creative contribution that feels that like it comes from your soul? So one, right? There's one of like, I'm going to go for this win because it's going to make me feel whole.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to produce this thing because I already feel whole and I have to produce it. I think that that might be the difference between enough,
That's a good
right?
point. Yeah. Yeah.
I was I was going to work with someone who is a chef who has, several restaurants and they're late 30s, couple of kids. And part of it was like, I want to have an empire. I want to have a mini empire. But I don't know, I can feel the strain already. So I'm all for someone having a mini empire. Totally. I think it's great. But I think the big question is why and what's the inspiration for it? I mean, I
Yeah.
ask this all the time, right? Someone's asked me, well, actually, I get this question a lot, like, why don't I do a podcast? It's typically because, like, I have nothing to add to that landscape.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
already well covered.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to like, yeah, if you want to do it because you enjoy the conversations or X, Y, and Z, okay, cool. But if it's just like the when as you were sharing that, what kind of popped in my head was the word status. Like a
Yeah,
lot of times we do things because it's like, oh, how is that going to look in the outside? I need more, 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 more money, more again, bigger business, whatever. Because how does that look? Instead of asking the question like, how does it make me feel?
right.
Am I whole? Like to your point, and if I am, then what do I need that for?
Yeah.
And I think it's a relevant question.
I think it's, it comes down to intention and motivation. Sorry. Yeah, what's your intention? What's your motive, right? And one of the things that we do in a lot of my coaching is scrutinize what people's motives are. And you have to ask 10 times or more, like, what's your real motive? What's your real motive? What's your real motive? Where's it coming from? Why are you doing this? Right. Like, you find that a lot of people, that motive is status, right? When you start to dig down, it's the status. And below that is marketability. Like, you and I met on LinkedIn. And I think
Mhm.
one of the great um, mindset problems from social media and particularly from LinkedIn is that it constantly reinforces the need to be marketable. And we have to make ourselves marketable. Because if we don't make ourselves marketable, what's underneath that? Then we're not going to get the job. And if we don't get the job, we're going to end up on the street. And if we end up on the street, we're going to be that guy living under a bridge, right?
Yeah.
It's this sort of baseline fear. And we don't we don't so we show up always marketing and always presenting and always performing. You talk about this in some ways in your newsletter from a sales standpoint, which is you're not there to sell. Show up to serve, 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 serve. And here's what it
Right.
means. It's not has nothing to do with you being marketable.
Right.
It has to do with you helping this person accomplish this thing that they want to accomplish. And that's a big motive shift.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always tried to get that across from a sales standpoint. It took me a long time to learn, but it's like the selling happens when you're good to people and you help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. Sometimes that's your product and service, other times it's not.
Comes the time.
But if,
Yeah.
but if you go into that with that mindset of like, oh my God, I'm going to try to sell, I'm going to try to close them today. It's not. It's going
I
back to
just
you're using before the analogy, the story you were saying before, that cyclist, if they go in like, oh, I'm gonna, like this is my whatever, that causes a lot of rift almost. It causes a lot of almost negativity, unforced negativity in the process.
I think that that's self-sabotage, that's self-inflicted friction, right?
Yeah.
That's we do that to ourselves
Right.
by setting up these expectations that we need to fill something in ourselves. Again, I get it. We have to make money. We have to pay the bills. We have these things that we commit to. I just say, let's look at it really closely and understand where it's coming from and where we really want it to go. Because I think a lot of that friction we end up feeling, that grinding down, is this misalignment between our actions and what we say our values are, or what do we say our expectations. And that causes a lot of friction. And that friction has its own invisible weight to it. And to your
Mm.
point, I actually was just talking about this. I wrote about this the other day. Is that one great shift that helped me is just going from a hunter mindset, which is I got to close the deal, I got to close the deal, I got to bag the kill, right? To a gardener mindset. Plant the seed, water it, nurture it, repeat, 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 and then harvest it. Like it may take me 6 months to get a client from the initial conversation to them being in a place where it's painful enough for them to go, the podcasts and the self-help books aren't working anymore. I got to talk to this guy.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
that's a really slow process in patience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think patience, I've always said, is one of the most underutilized and underappreciated skills in sales. Because especially if you're in like, I've been in a lot of software organizations, it's always like close by the end of the month or end of quarter. And it's like, oh, you got to, like, how do we get that deal in, a week early? And it's like, I've never like kind of aligned with that because I'm like, why does a week matter? I get it matters from investors and
Sure.
boards and, of reporting and stuff, but is that what the client needs?
Is
Answers
that what?
typically
Of
no.
course.
And so yeah, you're right on. Um, I wanted to a couple other things I wanted to get to here, and one of this, I like this concept. Can you go into this a little bit deeper? This idea of training versus transformation.
Hmm.
Can you share a little of
I
your thoughts on that?
for sure, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. I am really allergic to the language, the coaching language that we see across social media and LinkedIn. And I'm really allergic to the idea of we go through transformations. Um, I think that in some ways, what that instills is this magical thinking of, oh, I'm going to become this whole other person. Yeah, we transform and things change for sure. But what I don't sell as a coach is this idea of you will be transformed, right? I think for me, that training is let's find the stuff that let's find your strengths.
Mhm.
Let's find your natural gifts, your strengths, your talents, and figure out how to use those better, right? I think about this in cycling terms, right? You got a lot of gears on the back of that bike. And I think if you apply those gears to just how we go through life, we maybe use three of them, but you have more that you can use. And I think we forget how to use them because we've so pigeonholed ourselves into our roles as identities that we kind of forget that we can access these other things. So I think the other problem with transformation is that people often have this idea or this latent hope to be someone or something else.
Mhm.
I would just rather pull out this amazing version of Brian that's already there, right? I think a great example of this, there's a great real life example of this. Um, the first time I saw Johnny Cash perform was in the early 90s. And I think I saw him perform at like this VFW on the outskirts of Phoenix, right? I mean, here's a guy who was as big as the Beatles in the 60s, right? For his genre, he was huge, huge. And his career has faded and he's at the last part of his, he's in the later part of his career. And the producer, Rick Rubin, who I think is very on trend these days, said, "Hey, let's work together." I mean, and Rick Rubin, here's the guy who basically mainstreamed hip hop, right? He's like, "I want to work with Johnny Cash." And what does he do? He basically goes in and he just strips away the excess, the stuff that Johnny's doing. Strip it away. Get simple, get simple, get simple, get simple. Write lyrics more simply. Hey, why don't we record this Nine Inch Nails song, but imagine it from your perspective of being a man at the end of his life? Totally different story. Let's simplify. And I think that's the training, right? The training is not adding more. For me, the training is always taking away. Let's focus on things and take things away. And I think modern coaching, the coaching industry wants to add more. Like, let's make you a different person. Let's do this. Let's add this thing in. And I come from this from actually having worked with athletes, and more is not better. It's like less is better. Let's focus and use the tools that you've got in a different way.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, and even when you think of stripping away, like what comes to mind is like again, I only could speak on me. It's like, let me strip away the fear. Let me strip away some of the anxiety I had. Let me, strip away some of the self-limiting beliefs I learned as a child. And that's really what, when I talked about like the 10, 15 years ago, Brian, and today, the reason I'm drastically different is because it was a continual effort day in and day out, like training. Like it's like going to the gym. Like you don't just get muscles overnight. It's like you have to put in the effort and the work on the
Right.
right things. That was what I did. Like I read books, I journaled every day. I really got thoughtful about why do I let this bother me? Or wait, does that really belief true? So to your point, I kind of stripped away a lot of the
Sure.
negativity that was really surrounding me and exposed like probably the person that was that was inside me. I just didn't allow them out.
Yeah, you were wrapped up, I'm guessing, in this version of you that had to be marketable and had to do and had to be seen a certain way.
Sure.
And those needs then had you operating and showing up in a certain way. And as you start to move that other way, go, I don't really need that, right? I don't. I can
Yeah.
use less and less. And what you've done is completely rewired Brian's operating system.
Yeah. But I
But
think it's important. It doesn't happen overnight. That's the big thing here.
that's
We
exactly right. And I think the problem with selling transformation, as a lot of the gurus do, is that it takes a long time to change your metabolism, right? I think about this from a cycling perspective. We have phases that you go through of training, and it takes a really long time. And I often think, like, when I was coaching cyclists, they'd say, what's going to happen in the first year? I said, well, you're going to get a little bit faster, but you're going to actually learn how to be coached. That's the first process.
Mhm.
Then after that, we're going to start really changing and making adaptations in other ways. But what you've experienced in CrossFit, or what a cyclist or a runner might experience, is change down at the cellular level, how your mitochondria metabolizes things. And I think that it's also possible to talk about how we metabolize things on that inner work, right? And how when you start to metabolize things, your body changes, right? It changes how it deals with calories. It changes the calories that it likes. It changes how it handles stored energy. It's all that stuff. So I think it's also true in this kind of leadership performance coaching that I do.
Yeah. Well, it's I like the cycling analogy. What comes to mind as a golfer is, I don't know if you follow golf a lot, but if you look at Tiger Woods back in the day, Tiger wins 4 times in 97, wins the Masters, youngest champion ever, like sets all these records, and then completely decides to change his golf swing. And he was getting just demolished by the media. Like in 98, I think he ended up winning 1 time. And in 99, he almost didn't win until later in the season. And everyone's like, oh my God, whatever. Well, then, of course, the next 6, 7, I mean, 2000 was one of the most historic years in golf history. And then, the next 5, 6 years were just monumental. But you don't see that when he's in the grind every day behind the scenes, kind of putting the work in. And you can call it, wow, look at this transformation. But it really was, no, he made the effort every day and he
Yeah.
put the time in slowly but surely, you know?
I think Andre Agassi was another great example of this, right? I think he shows up in the early 90s as this brash, arrogant player, long hair and jorts,
Mhm.
and he hits a ceiling, right? He's angry at the sport. He's still sort of like playing the sport like it beat up his mom, and he's just railing against it, and he has to go away, and he kind of goes away, and he does his work, and he comes back, and he starts like just becoming this incredibly winning player, and he does this a couple of times, and so he goes off and does that player development for himself, which is both the physical and the mental side. And I think when the first time he came back, he said something to the effect of, yeah, I stopped playing like I was angry at my dad, and I realized why I loved the sport. Like I didn't play it like I hated the sport anymore. I
Yeah.
came back and found a different love because I started playing it in a different way. And I think this is true for a lot of people that I work with, right? If you compare them to back half of their career professional athlete, they may have been super fast, powerful, and strong in the first part of their career, but as you get older and you take more hits, or you can't play on sheer strength anymore. You can't play on sheer power. You can't play. You can play on endurance. You'll definitely have endurance, but there are things that just have to change. You have to develop a different kind of sight and resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes with anything. Is like you grow that wisdom. Maybe you lose some of the athletic ability, but you grow the wisdom to kind of get around some of the to plot your way around a little bit different, right?
Right. Right. Exactly. So I think, when I talk about going back to that strategic reset idea, I think it's exactly that. It's like, let's find what wisdom is in there, right? What have you been working on that no longer or what tools have you been using that are no longer using? And what can we be using
And they're no longer
differently?
using. And
What can we be using different?
so, Brian, let me ask you this. And I'm gonna we can create a challenge for people if we want, but if someone's starting today, they're listening to this and they're like, all right, something's got to get. I got to do something different. What's like what's step one for them? Is there a question they can ask themselves, an exercise they can do? Like what action can they take today to get started in the right direction?
Yeah. I think one of the simplest practices that we can do to start is just to start observing and becoming aware of the conversation we're having. I think a lot of times in that case, what you're talking about is we're very tuned into the friction, we're very tuned into the pain, but we're not so tuned into the causes of the pain, right? And so I think a simple sitting practice of, 4 or 5 minutes in the morning before or at lunch or wherever, anything to disrupt the cycle, right? And so for me, I like to create pause in the morning And that just might mean a simple 5-minute sitting practice, no sounds, no earbuds, no music, just kind of hear the sounds that are going on around me and not fixating on things. So it might be I hear the coffee machine, it might be I hear a clock, it might be my cat getting restless, it might be the outdoors, but not hearing, not getting too fixated on something. And then start tuning in for what are the judgments that I'm putting into that silence. Like, am I saying, am I bored? This is boring. Why am I doing this? This is awful.
All right.
I can't do this. And just start listening to the conversations that you're having with yourself. I think that that is really one simple practice. It doesn't even have to be 5 minutes. That might be too long. It might be just 1 minute, right?
Or start
But
with
it,
1 minute,
or
right? I
start
mean,
with one, whatever. Yeah, yeah. Work your way, whatever, and
yeah.
resist the temptation to, and I've been very poor at this myself lately, like resist the temptation to pick up the phone first thing, like talk to yourself first, have the conversation with yourself first, right? Uh, and get aware of what's going on with yourself before we start letting others intrude on that space. Um, And then I think figure out then you start to become more aware of the conversation that you're having and what is it you're really saying. I think a simple question to also ask when that friction comes up or when you start having the self-talk that comes up is that it's a very easy question is what am I believing about myself right now? What am I believing about this situation right now?
Yeah, and I think more again, I know for me personally, like, just even jotting that down a little bit, over a period of time, you start to sense patterns,
Right.
and it kinda gives you like, "Ah, wait a minute, that's
Right.
come up a few times. Let's dig into this a little bit more." And I'm gonna butcher the quote, but I think it's like Blaise Pascal. What is the quote? Like, "A lot of the man's problems would be solved by sitting alone in silence for a period of time," or something. I don't remember the exact
I'm
quote.
I'm sure. I mean, what like there's I don't remember who it is, but there's one of those internet gurus who talks about the misery manufacturing machine, right? And what he's actually talking about is the conversation that we have between our ears. Like we are the greatest manufacturers of our own misery, which isn't to say that bad things don't happen in our lives, but the conversation that we have around those things and the way we hold on to them and the way that we continue to perpetuate them and retell them or judge them or observe them, that's where the misery comes from, is how we stay in relation to those things. So yeah, I think that's right. It's like sitting in silence is a marvelous start.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's unbelievable when you actually can do it.
Right.
And it's kind of like, I joke around with, okay, I love doing yoga, but it's also really hard for me. But it's like, then when you finish the yoga practice, it's like, oh my God, this is phenomenal. I should do this every day. It's just like something you have to
Yeah.
put into practice.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think just to add on to this listening practice is that you anchor it to breathing, right? You've brought up yoga, anchor it to breathing. And a simple way is you say in on the inhale, out on the exhale, or you say, I'm going to do it to a count of 4 in, a count of 4 out. But I think you anchor it to something. And I think also don't try to bolt it on or stack it on to things, right? I mean, I know that we're all about hacks and stacks these days, but I think that we actually need to do less of that and treat it as a discrete experience, right? Put in the reps of just tuning in to what the conversation that you're having with yourself. And don't make it oh, well, I'm going to add this into deadlifting, right? It's not. Those are separate experiences. Enjoy the deadlift for what it is.
Right.
Enjoy the breathing experience for what it is. But
Yeah.
don't combine the two because you're trying to rush to a thing on your to-do list.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Brian, this has been a lot of fun, man. Is there anything else you'd hope we talk about? Anything that you'd want to share maybe with myself or the audience? Anything that's on your mind, top of mind to end our conversation on?
Yeah, I mean, why don't we just quickly uh, from a just get started standpoint, I assume that a lot of your listeners are really just trying to figure out how to get something done or how to create something, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Or navigating life's like what we're talking about, career, do I leave my job? Do I build this business? Do I write this book? like kind of these a lot of it's kind of poking at the identity and kind of our,
Great.
what we've built up throughout life.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm a terrible person to ask about writing a book because I keep picking one up and keep putting it down, much to the chagrin of some of my friends on LinkedIn and the constant prodding. But yeah, I've produced a lot of stuff. I started producing a huge cycling race where I live about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, and it grew from we didn't know what year one was going to be
Mhm.
to last year getting listed in a big cycling magazine as one of the top 10 events to do in the country.
Wow.
And here's the thing, but that's total luck, right? That's total
Sure.
luck. And I think what's really important for people getting started is know why you're starting it. And for us, it was never about the money. It was about not going broke, making the thing, that's for sure, but it was never about the money. It was always about the community where we live and then enhancing the cycling community that we wanted to come in to the community and ride our roads. And then it was to help showcase people who do awesome things where we live so we could bring all those things together. So I think have a good sense of why you're doing something. I think that really helps. Even if what we're talking about here is a leadership change, have an idea of what it is you're moving towards. It doesn't have to be a perfect idea, just have a skeleton of an idea and know that when you take the next step, it's going to get clearer and clearer and clearer. And then sometimes it'll seem foggy, but just keep moving forward and keep clarifying what it is you're moving towards.
Yeah. If I'm summing it up correctly, it's kind of that old adage of like, are you getting pulled towards something or are you running away from something? Kind of knowing what the probably the positive attributes are of why you're doing something, right?
I think that's right. I mean, listen, I spent a lot of time running away from something and had multiple partnerships because I was running away. I moved into business partnerships that reflected that. And there was a lot of fear in them. And so, what you want to be doing is moving towards things that are not necessarily governed by fear, right? But if the thing that's causing you to run is fear, then most of your decisions are going to also reflect that. And it's an expensive thing to break up business partnerships.
Yeah, yeah,
Expensive mistakes can be costly. So mistakes. That's when it's good to have a strategic reset and to kind of sit down and get clear and process some things before really moving forward.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Brian, this has been a lot of fun, man. All right, so you got the Shift Happens. I love the title. Shift
Thanks.
Happens newsletter. You're on LinkedIn. Everyone can search you, Brian with a Y, the second best way to spell it. And
You've just been waiting to drop that.
um, where else can people find you? Anywhere else you're spending time online?
No, I think I mean, I've got a sort of a loose YouTube channel with some videos that are on there. I would say, I'm not, I'm not your model social social media user, right? But I do write a lot on LinkedIn. I do write a lot on my newsletter. It's only a monthly newsletter because y'all don't need that much more of me than once a month.
No.
You can sort of see what I do on my website, which is locomotivecoaching.com. And that's locomotive without an E. Long story. It needs a rebrand at some point. Uh, and yeah, just reach out. I would love it if you join the newsletter. And if you just want to reach out and say hello over direct message, I love having conversations.
Wonderful, Brian. This was a lot of fun, man. I'm glad we went into some depths of certain areas, and appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Thanks so much for having me. I love being on. You do a great show. And I think you bring a lot of really great conversations to people. So thank you for doing that.